I won't let anyone else in the car. Please come by foot," said my son's wife, chuckling as she twirled the car keys around her finger to show me. While organizing the situation in my head, I felt a sense of despair. How long would it take to get to my son and his wife's new home from here? Following my son's job transfer, they decided to move to the countryside, building a house in a modest residential area. Unfortunately, public transportation only goes so far, not reaching close to their new home. Smirking with delight, my son's wife quickly returned to where the others were, leaving me behind. With no other choice, I sighed and took out my smartphone to see how far I could get by bus. It seemed there was a bus from here that could shorten the walking distance. Gathering my spirits, I searched for the bus stop when someone tapped my shoulder, making me turn around.
"Why?"
I was surprised by the person behind me and couldn't find the words to continue. "My name is Susan. I'm 72 years old this year. Thanks to the environment I grew up in, I'm quite sturdy for my age. Right after graduating, I married into a family that ran a business, and I worked there as well. My job was to deliver goods over the mountain to a store, taking over for my husband, father-in-law, and mother-in-law who worked at the store or did deliveries by car. Even after having my first son, I continued doing this, carrying him on my back. My son is now grown up, married, and seems to be living happily. I still remember when he brought home his wife, wanting to marry her. Despite being nervous, I was surprised but agreed since he was so serious. However, it seems she doesn't like me much, going out of her way to bother me when my husband and son aren't looking. Maybe she's annoyed that my son, who is kind-hearted, pays too much attention not just to her but to us as well. Initially, I kept silent for the sake of my son's choice, but lately, her harassment has become unbearable. One Christmas, looking forward to my son and his wife's visit after a long time, I thought she wouldn't dare do anything with my husband and son around. But as soon as she arrived at our home, she asked to use the kitchen to show her gratitude with her cooking, so I accepted her offer. I was quite worried about her, then suddenly she caused a disaster with an exploding microwave. Upon hearing the sound, everyone rushed to the kitchen and we saw milk and ketchup all over the floor. The kitchen was a complete mess. Sitting on the floor, crying about wanting to help, she was consoled by my son and husband, who could only laugh it off. As my son tried to take her to the shower, she looked back at me and smirked. My husband, busy cleaning up, didn't see her malicious face. Realizing it was another of her harassments, I was furious but had to keep quiet and help clean silently. Months later, with my son's transfer looming, they decided to build a house, planning ahead. Originally working at the headquarters in New York, my son was assigned to a branch, prompting the move. The branch was in our hometown, and we considered living together. But his wife strictly opposed it, so they built their new home. There was a disagreement over the down payment for the new house, sparked by my son insisting on handling the finances themselves. Though grateful, I wondered where his stay-at-home wife would get such money. The next day, she called, asking for money for the new house, claiming I had plenty because I was frugal. When I objected, saying this wasn't what I was told, she retorted, "Well, I want to look good in front of Roy too. I've already told him I'd pay, so please give it to me as soon as possible." Though I wondered why I had to give money to my son's wife, I decided to stay silent and give it for my son's sake. However, after the house was built, I never received any thanks. As the fiscal year-end approached and my son's transfer was finalized, they invited us to see the new house. "We'll send the address to your smartphone. Bring a housewarming gift," she said before hanging up. Despite disliking her attitude, I was curious about the house I helped fund. My husband and I planned to visit next weekend. Upon arriving at the airport in their town, to my surprise, they came to pick us up. Initially, we were supposed to go directly to their house, but my son kindly offered a ride. After reuniting, we decided to grab lunch at a food court inside the station, enjoying a peaceful moment since it had been a while since we last met. With my husband and son around, his wife behaved, which relieved me. Before heading to their new home, I excused myself to use the restroom. But it was lunchtime, and everywhere was crowded. Finally, after using the restroom and washing my hands, someone suddenly spoke to me from behind. "Are you still here? Roy said to go look for you because you're taking so long," said my son's wife, glaring at me unpleasantly. Being scolded in front of so many people, I felt intimidated. Pleased with my reaction, my son's wife smirked. "Are you still using that dirty handkerchief? It's about time to throw it away," she scoffed, pointing at the jet dryer while laughing through her nose at the handkerchief I was holding. "Nobody carries a handkerchief around anymore. Don't you know about jet dryers? Poor thing," she said loudly enough for others to notice us, drawing disdainful looks from other users. Seeing me shrink even more, my son's wife got carried away and said, "I don't want to be associated with someone so poor. I'd rather pretend we're strangers. So, strangers don't get rides in the car. You can walk, Susan," chuckling as she twirled the car keys in front of me demonstratively. Realizing what this meant, I felt a mild sense of despair as I sorted through the situation in my head. How far would it be to my son and his wife's new home from here? Their new home was in a modest residential area far from here. Unfortunately, public transportation only goes so far, not reaching close to their new house. "Oh, I have the gift you were supposed to bring. I'll be taking it in advance, okay?" she said, distorting her mouth in amusement before quickly going back to the others, leaving me behind. Feeling slightly relieved after my son's wife left, I sighed and decided to take the bus as far as possible, taking out my smartphone to check. Luckily, there seemed to be a bus from here that could reduce the walking distance somewhat. Regaining my composure, I looked for the bus stop when someone tapped my shoulder, making me turn around. "Why?" Surprised by the person behind me, I couldn't find the words to continue. "There you are, I've been looking for you." Seeing my husband's face when I turned around eased the anxiety that had stiffened my heart. As we headed to the bus stop, I told him everything while he followed, puzzled yet listening. I told him about the harassment from my son's wife, the issue with the finances for the new house, and everything that happened today, sharing everything as we rode the bus together. Throughout, my husband listened silently, his frown deepening as the story progressed. After I finished, he simply said he'd walk with me and remained silent. Despite my insistence to turn back, he steadfastly refused. When the bus reached its final stop, everyone disembarked. Now, from here, the distance to my son and his wife's new home was significant, with no public transport available. Entering the destination into my map app, it showed it would take roughly over 3 hours to arrive. "Let's go." Unsure of which direction to head, I stared at the map app, but my husband started walking without hesitation. Following him, I checked the map app to ensure we weren't going the wrong way. However, my husband had chosen the correct direction. A short while later, my phone rang. Seeing it was from my son's wife, I hesitated to answer, looking towards my husband for help. Noticing my gaze, he glanced at my phone, grimaced, took it, and pocketed it before continuing to walk. Realizing I had stopped, he looked back, silently took my hand, and we started walking again. Surprised by the suddenness, I had a lot to say, but it all flew out of my mind. My husband pulled me along silently, never hesitating. Despite the many forks in the road, he chose the path without any hesitation. And I followed silently, hearing my phone vibrate periodically. I finally pulled at my husband's hand and suggested, "It must be Kelly calling. Maybe you should answer it, it's annoying, isn't it?" Stopping, my husband turned to me and said, "Just ignore her. Are you tired?" Touched by his concern, I smiled and made a fist. "This is nothing compared to the deliveries I used to do. Are you tired?" "I'm fine. I'm sorry for all the trouble up to now," he muttered softly, clearly an apology to me. Following my husband as he started walking again, I laughed, forgetting the current situation. Pretending to talk to myself, I recounted everything to my husband as he walked ahead. I talked about helping with deliveries right after we got married, our son Roy being born, and when Roy brought home his wife, Kelly, saying he wanted to marry her. My husband walked on in silence, but he seemed to be listening. Suddenly stopping, he turned to me and said, "If we take the wider path, it'll be a longer, but smoother journey. The narrower path is a bit rougher but will get us there faster." "I'm taking the narrow path, what about you?" Touched by his concern, I grinned and quickened my pace to catch up to him. Then, overtaking him, I said, asking someone who's been crossing mountains for years? "Let's hurry up, Roy must be worried." Continuing together, we soon reached a quiet residential area, where a brand new house could be seen. Finally, we arrived at our destination. After getting my phone back from my husband, I saw a slew of missed calls from Kelly but chose to ignore them to check the time. Just as my husband had said, the journey that was supposed to take over 3 hours was shortened. Thinking of it as the last stretch, I braced myself and we finally reached Roy and Kelly's new home. Roy's car was parked in the garage. Pressing the doorbell, hurried footsteps approached from inside, and the door swung open. Roy, looking pale, welcomed us in first. We were led to the living room sofa to finally relax. Looking around the well-built house while massaging my tired feet, I felt proud. Roy then brought us cold drinks. "Mom, Dad, I was surprised to hear you walked here all of a sudden. Are you okay? You must be tired, why don't you stay the night?" Sitting across from us, Roy looked concerned, but my husband sharply replied, "No. We'll leave once we've calmed down. We don't want to stay in a house with such a terrible daughter-in-law." Hearing this, Roy's eyes widened as he looked for Kelly, who was nowhere to be seen. He hurried upstairs. After a bit of noise from upstairs, Kelly seemed to resign and came down with Roy. Sitting next to him, Kelly wouldn't meet our eyes. Roy asked about the meaning behind my husband's words. My husband, with a bitter face, yelled at Kelly, "All this time, you've been deceiving us. We thought you were a slightly clumsy but charming daughter-in-law, but it turns out you've been doing terrible things to my wife." Shaking, Kelly kept silent as my husband continued his tirade. Roy tried to intervene and stop my husband, but my husband wouldn't be stopped. "Even when building this house, we admired you for wanting to manage on your own, but to think you were extorting money from my wife." Roy stopped trying to intervene as my husband's words echoed through the room. I calmed my husband down, asking him to sit, and did the same with Roy. Addressing Kelly without looking at me, I laid bare my feelings. "Kelly, the money issue is fine. I wanted to help you build this house. But your entitled attitude was unacceptable. It made me angry." Kelly remained silent as I spoke. And Roy looked back and forth between us, confused. "Do you know why I gave you the money even though I didn't have to?" Kelly shook her head. "It's because it would trouble Roy. He didn't want to burden us and planned to manage on his own. If I said the money came from me, wouldn't that make you feel guilty? So I said it was from you, not for your sake." My stern words finally made Kelly break down and cry. Satisfied that I had said my piece, I sat back down. Roy then asked, "Mom, did you pay for half of this house?" "Yes." "And Kelly made you do it?" "Yes." Roy, overwhelmed, turned to Kelly. "What have you done? We agreed not to burden our parents, and now this. You said you had enough savings." My husband added, "This terrible daughter-in-law has been harassing my wife in secret. The mess in the kitchen during Christmas and making us walk today was all on purpose." "Kelly." Roy stood up, angrily denouncing Kelly. "I'm sorry. I was just jealous because you were always looking after your mom and dad, and I felt left out." Kelly started begging for forgiveness. But my husband was unforgiving. "Why target my wife then? I get attention from Roy too, so why am I left out?" "That's because..." Probably because of my husband's stern look, despite his age. Kelly might have thought better than to argue back. My husband pressed on. "What about the finances for this house? Why did you only tell my wife and not both of us? Even if you found it hard to tell me, don't you think it's rude to call someone trying to lend you money poor? Hearing this, Roy looked up sharply at Kelly. Kelly, biting her lip in silence, received a trembling confirmation from Roy. Kelly, you made my mom give you money and even said that? With no other option, Kelly nodded tearfully. While Roy collapsed on the sofa, overwhelmed by guilt for not knowing. Kelly, scorned by Roy and yelled at by my husband, kept apologizing. When my husband demanded the money back, Kelly shook her head. I don't have any savings, please forgive me. Then, she pulled a box from under the TV stand, showing us a bank book with barely a few dollars left. Seeing this, my husband urged Roy towards divorce. Exactly. After all the care my mom gave you, to call her a stranger. I'd rather be strangers with such a person. Kelly clung to Roy, wailing for him not to divorce her. After that, no one could handle Kelly, and Roy drove us to the station. Roy then went straight to the city hall to file for divorce. When discussing the divorce, Kelly's parents, who were decent people, called to apologize sincerely on her behalf and even provided compensation through Roy. It's baffling how such honorable parents ended up with a daughter like that. Kelly, of course, was kicked out of the new house and is now at her parents' house. Despite her pleas, Roy did not budge, and they are still discussing divorce. As for us, we're planning to move out of our old house and into the clean, emptied new home that once belonged to Kelly. Roy offered to live together since the mortgage is still outstanding, and it would be a shame to demolish the newly built house. Initially hesitant, my husband eventually agreed to Roy's persistence. Once settled in Roy's new home, we spent our days leisurely drinking coffee in the living room while he was at work. In this quiet residential area, all you could hear was the chirping of birds. During this peaceful time, I asked my husband how he knew the way so well. Why did you know the way so well? He said, I used to deliver around here back in the day. This place is like my backyard. Watching my proud husband, I couldn't help but laugh. It seems we're in for happy days ahead as a family.